5 centuries after its accidental discovery by the Portuguese navigator Pedro Álvares Cabral, Brazil is still a country that stirs the imagination. Beyond its natural resources, Brazil's greatest wealth is its population. Its 180 million inhabitants are the fruit of an ethnic blend of Amerindian and European, but also African ancestry. The African connection born from slavery has undoubtedly contributed the most to the present-day Brazilian identity. Skin color, religious practices, cuisine, dance, and of course music are all fundamental components of Brazilian culture that have their roots in the heart of the African continent.
We're always thinking about Africa. Always. When we talk about how we appropriated African elements. Brazilian music is Brazilian as a consequence. Deep down, at the heart, it's African music. Music of African origin.
We continued our maritime route straight across the open sea until the Tuesday following Easter, when we met with signs of land. Thursday morning, the 23rd of April, 1500, the caravels were sent forward, and we dropped anchor to the right of a river mouth. From there, we could see men coming and going on the shore. Their copper-skinned bodies were completely naked, with nothing to cover their private parts. They were carrying bows and arrows. This is how Pedro Vaz de Caminha, sailing on Cabral's caravel in that April 1500, related the discovery of Brazil in his logbook.
When the Portuguese first arrived, they discovered a region covered by a vast forest of native trees, the pau-Brazil, Brazil wood. And the beaches were thick with cashew trees. It was only later that they planted coconut trees. At the beginning, there was a war for the control of the territory. The Portuguese took over the Olinda Hills, and from there they conquered the Amerindian tribes, and in particular the Caetes. In 1576, Olinda was still very sparsely populated. Every 3 months, the few inhabitants would watch the caravels approach. But since there was no harbour, they couldn't put in at Olinda, and the ships would continue on to Recife. So Recife owes its existence to its natural harbour that could accommodate the caravels.
Today, Recife, known as the Venice of South America for its many bridges, is a modern city of close to 2 million inhabitants. Thanks to its position jutting out into the Atlantic Ocean in the northeast of the country, close to both Lisbon and the Portuguese trading posts in Africa on the sea routes to South America, Recife became the major city during the early period of colonization. For the pioneering caravels right down to the great clippers at the end of the 19th century, all the sea routes between Europe and Brazil led to Recife. The opening of the Panama Canal at the beginning of the 20th century, and more recently the rise in commercial air traffic, have reduced the transatlantic sea traffic. Now, only the rare cruise ship, reliving a page of history, and a few cargo ships put in at Recife. Recife, a microcosm of all Brazil, is a melting pot society of Amerindian, European, and African influences. These roots can be seen, of course, in the physical traits of the population, but are also found in many everyday gestures, like buying remedies made from medicinal plants, a legacy from the Tupi-Guarani Indians, the original native population of the region. Surrounded by these elegant, colorful homes dating back to the Dutch occupation of the 17th century, the market stands are chock full of surprising shapes, colors, and aromas. In addition to the colors and rhythms, the blending of the European, Amerindian, and African influences also shows up in the religious practices. These statuettes, for example, which represent the deities of Candomblé, a syncretic religion born from the marriage of Christianity and African animism, wait patiently among the fruit and vegetables for the interested customer to buy them. The Portuguese first grew sugarcane, which originally came from Southeast Asia, on the island of Madeira, then in their African possessions of Sao Tome and Guinea, before bringing it to Brazil in the mid-16th century. At first, the Portuguese colonists used Indian slaves on the labor-intensive sugar plantations, but the Indians, called negros da terra, were not very robust, and they died off from disease, were exterminated, or fled to the protection of the Jesuits in the south. So African slaves were imported to Brazil on a small scale at first, then in great numbers from the 18th century on. Music and dance are two of the major contributions that Africa has made to Brazil. The Maracatu, originally practiced by the slaves, is a dance that accompanied the coronation ceremonies of the kings of the Congo. It's still very important in the northeast of Brazil. In Aliança, in the province of Pernambuco, one of the most original forms of this traditional dance lives on, the rural Maracatu. Born from the meeting of the Mamelucos, the Indian white half-breeds, and the blacks who came to live on their plantations, the rural Maracatu is one of the few examples of a cultural fusion between African slaves and Amerindians. Each participant dons the ceremonial costume of the role he will be playing in the procession. For all the participants, peasants for the most part, the rural Maracatu is the only time they really have fun. Among themselves, they call it the toy.
My work? I cut the grass. I grow manioc, macassera, potatoes, the coentro, corn, beans.
Led by Mateo, a kind of harlequin clown figure, the procession is at last getting underway. All around you, you have the caboclos, straight from the world of the Amerindian. They protect the royal procession. They frighten off the evil spirits with their spears and the bells attached to their costumes. The caboclo sorcerers, with their headdress of peacock feathers, make up the royal guard of the king and queen, who are at the center of the procession, sheltered by an umbrella held by a slave. The band, composed of brass and percussion, accompanies the lead solist's improvisations, which are then taken up by the chorus.
deseja algumas coisas, pronto à disposição. Se deseja alguma
The royal procession moves and stops to the orders given by a whistle, and the ceremony will last for several hours.
essa estrela de ouro, onde chega faz a festa. Essa estrela de ouro, onde chega faz a festa. Quem é que não tem saudade de uma brincadeira dessa?
The high point of the sugar industry was at the beginning of the 17th century. At that time, there were 350 plantations in just the two provinces of Pernambuco and Bahia. The slave trade flourished and became very organized. Sailing from Lisbon, the slave ships would take on their human cargo in the Gulf of Guinea, then would head west towards Recife, Salvador, and later Rio de Janeiro. After a brutal voyage, the survivors were assigned to a plantation, separated from their families and ethnic groups. From that point on, they became the property of their master.
This used to be a sugar plantation. There were a number of different buildings on the property, housing the people who lived or worked on the plantation. First you have the church, where they would come to pray and receive spiritual guidance. The church was also the symbol of the reigning order. Right next to it, there's the Casa Grande, the mansion where the owner lived. Over on the other side, you'll see the slaves' quarters. Thus we have a little sociological triangle: religious power, civil power, and the workers. Further on, you have the sheds that house the mills and all the machinery for sugar production.
Mandingo, Wolof, Peul, Yoruba. Then the conquest of Angola at the end of the 16th century led to the importation of close to 13,000 Bantus a year.
The slaves that arrived in Pernambuco were Bantus, a stockier and more robust African tribe. This plantation, like most of the others, had between 100 and 150 slaves, but some of the bigger plantations could have up to 400.
The survival of these African slaves from different ethnic groups and without a common language depended largely on their ability to adapt to this new country, where, unlike the Amerindian slaves, they had no roots or reference points. Crushed by the back-breaking toil, the slaves' life expectancy was between 5 and 8 years.
This was a land of suffering and dreams. Everyone had dreams, but the dreams that came true were those of the masters. The suffering belonged to the slaves. Brazil was forged by the fusion of the one's dreams and the other's toil and suffering.
as we leave Recife and head towards Salvador de Bahia, the captain of the Rhapsody recalls the courage of those navigators who, after an extremely perilous ocean crossing, explored the coastline of Brazil 5 centuries ago.
I
think those early European explorers, the Spanish, the Italians, the Portuguese, accomplished some kind of miracle when they left Europe to strike out on the unknown sea. Now we have incredible ships, equipped with all the most modern, sophisticated instruments. When I think of how they had to navigate back then, centuries ago, the rudimentary means they used to sail the seas, well, from the comfort of these modern cruise ships, we can appreciate all the more these places we're visiting, where they landed for the very first time. When the Italian navigator Amerigo Vespucci sailed into this natural harbor on November 1st, 1501, All Saints' Day, he decided to christen it San Salvador de Bahia de Todos os Santos, All Saints' Bay. The rare sailboats that put into the harbor of Salvador de Bahia now have not braved the perilous ocean. They've just sailed in from a little village of potters a few dozen miles away to deliver their goods to the big São Joaquim market. The cruise ships, which are more numerous every year, put in at the commercial port where the cargo ships laden with sugarcane leave for Europe. Salvador de Bahia was the capital of colonial Brazil until 1763. This simple fact, plus the needs of the expanding sugar industry, made Salvador the slavery center of all Brazil. Today, Africa is omnipresent in Salvador de Bahia, in its inhabitants, in its music, and in its religion. And then there's also the busy market of São Joaquim, where you can find not only sugarcane and a colorful variety of fruit and vegetables, but also coriander, hot peppers, okra, and palm oil. All these products are part of the African slaves' influence on the cuisine of Bahia.
The African cultural legacy goes well beyond the culinary habits. It has influenced all aspects of the Bahian society, from the most commonplace to the most sacred. Even the place names are the fruit of this interbreeding. The Plaza Terreiro de Jesus, for example, located in the heart of the colonial town, links the name of Jesus with Terreiro, a place of worship of Candomblé, the major Afro-Brazilian religion. In Bahia, this blending pervades the atmosphere, the air itself, as African percussions echo off the facades of the Baroque and Rococo churches. One of the buildings on the Terreiro de Jesus houses the Afro-Brazilian Museum. Raimundo, one of the Candomblé dignitaries, has, oddly enough, never visited this museum. And yet the statuettes, the musical instruments, the sacred objects, and the costumes can give us a better understanding of how Candomblé is related, or rather descended from certain African religions. Candomblé is an integral part of the Bahianese's daily life, and most of them worship both in church and in the terreiro.
Not everyone has a terreiro. A terreiro is like a church. It's a place of worship for the Candomblé religion. The most important person is called, in the African language, the Tata Dinkas, Pedro Santo, Father of the Saints. The Tata Dinkas has a large circle of assistants called Ogons. These deacons are called Tata Kambondo, in the language of Angola and the Congo. To become a Tata Kambondo, a person has to be chosen and initiated by the Tata Dinkas.
The slaves, forced to adopt the religion of their masters, continued to practice their African rites in secret, far from the gold and ostentatious riches of the Baroque churches, symbols of the colonial power. As they were passed down from generation to generation, the animistic rites appropriated certain conventions and rituals from the Catholic religion. But for the most part, these Afro-Brazilian religions, like Candomblé, have preserved their identity. This home, in one of Salvador's poorer neighborhoods, houses a terreiro. The Mãe do Santo, the Mother of the Saints, a veritable high priestess, pays homage to the divine spirits to which these little altars are dedicated. The time for the ceremony is drawing near. The final preparations. They cut the sticks that the musicians will use to beat the skins of the atabaque and the ilus, the drums that will rhythm the dances and back up the sacred chants. The Mãe do Santo conducts the ceremony and chants in Yoruba, the language of their ancestors. Then the other members take up the chant. Little by little, the sacred chants along with the pulsing rhythms induce a state of trance. Dressed like the Orisha, the divinity that possesses them, the initiates enter into the dance. The district of Pelourinho, completely restored and now classed a World Heritage Site by the UNESCO, is the heart of the old colonial town. In just a few years, Pelourinho, with its multicolored houses, has become the town's main tourist attraction. Even those souvenir shops and restaurants serving the famous moqueca, one of the treasures of Bahianese cooking, have proliferated, the soul of the quarter has remained unchanged. It's easy to prove it. All you have to do is take a stroll by the front of Rosario dos Prenos Church on the feast day of Santa Bárbara.
Essa igreja ela foi construída pelos escravos. No período
This
da
church was built by slaves during the colonial period.
negros não se sentiam
The
bem
blacks didn't feel at home in the other
das
churches,
igrejas.
so they constructed their own,
Construíram a sua própria igreja à noite,
working at night,
porque durante o dia
because during the day,
trabalhar na
they had to do
escravidão.
their slave work.
E construíram com dinheiro,
They built it with their own money, their own sweat,
com o
and
trabalho.
labor.
E essa igreja ela passou a ser símbolo
And this
não
church has
somente
become a symbol,
da
not only of their
religiosidade,
religious faith,
mas também da
but also of
resistência
resistance to any form of enslavement.
escraviza.
And it continues to be their symbol
Era símbolo,
of emancipation.
Continua sendo símbolo da libertação.
A nossa proteção está em nome do Senhor. O Senhor esteja convosco. Pela intercessão de Santa Bárbara, que desça sobre cada um de nós a bênção, a paz e a proteção de Deus Todo-Poderoso, o Deus que é Pai, Filho e Espírito Santo. E
A missa, ela é católica,
louvado seja
né?
nosso Senhor Jesus Cristo.
Mas na
It's a
missa
Catholic Mass,
a-
but the liturgy is accompanied by objects of African culture.
ela vem acompanhada dos instrumentos e com influência
The musical
da cultura
instruments, for
afro,
example.
ou seja, os instrumentos que se tocam,
The timbales, the drums, the agogo,
timbal, tambor,
all these instruments
agogô,
come from African culture
instrumentos próprios
and are all used in candomblé ceremonies as well.
no candomblé. Essa dicotomia, essa separação, ela é muito clara.
There's a very clear-cut dichotomy in the minds of the church intellectuals, but for the people, the question doesn't even cross their minds.
Na cabeça do povo, o
The
que
people are
existe
inhabited
é a
by
fé,
faith and religious
é a
mysticism.
mística religiosa. Então,
So the people who want to
para o
live their
povo,
religion to the fullest
a
attend
religiosidade só
services
está
both at
completa
Santa Barbara Church
se há
and Yansan,
essa
its candomblé twin
complementariedade.
sister.
Santa Bárbara e Ansan.
The fortifications that tower up in certain spots recall the strategic importance of All Saints Bay. They're vestiges of the colonial period and, in particular, the Dutch attacks of the 17th century, an attempt to seize the province, which at the time was the center of the world's sugar industry. There are no longer any foreign powers seeking to conquer the bay. The coastline stretching out to either side of the old town is now only a series of little fishing villages and beaches, where the Bahianese come to relax with their families in the evenings and on weekends. The Bahianese are, like all Brazilians, enthusiastic soccer fans, but they're also very fond of capoeira.
Capoeira is an African phenomenon that developed in Brazil. People tell me, I've been to Africa, but I didn't see any capoeira there. Capoeira has, of course, evolved since the time the Africans were enslaved and loaded onto the slave ships by the colonials. In Africa, capoeira was a sect for initiates. With slavery, the Brazilian blacks realized they could transform capoeira into a martial art, a symbol of the struggle against the colonial oppression, against the yoke of the plantation owners.
Each session of capoeira opens with an incantation in Yoruba, accompanied by tambourines and the berimbau, a musical bow with its metal wire and a calabash for a sounding box.
For us, the Angola capoeira is always practiced with the partner, never against him. Philosophically, it's like a physical dialogue, where one person's movement is the question and the other's is the answer. From a certain point of view, I can't say that slavery no longer exists in present-day Brazil. And along with the growth of this new form of slavery, we have a new way of practicing capoeira. For our group, capoeira continues to be a way of working and struggling towards the emancipation of black people.
The last stop on our voyage in quest of Brazil's African roots is Rio de Janeiro. Even though Brasilia has taken over its position as capital, and it has never had the economic clout of São Paulo, in the eyes of the whole world, Rio is still the symbol of Brazil. The name of Rio de Janeiro, most often associated with Carnival, Bossa Nova, the beaches of Copacabana and Ipanema, Sugarloaf Mountain and Corcovado, evokes a certain frivolity. And yet, Rio's history, like that of Recife and Salvador, is steeped in colonization, slavery, and therefore Africa. With the transfer of power from Salvador de Bahia to Rio de Janeiro, the thriving period of colonialism associated with the sugar industry came to an end. The 19th century ushered in the era of industrial capitalism and its European models.
In the course of this profound transformation, Rio de Janeiro and its inhabitants, the Cariocas, seem to have forgotten their African past. It was probably the immigrants from the Northeast who brought their beliefs and traditions with them that enabled Rio to reconnect with its black roots. From the air, one is, of course, struck by the magnificent view of the Bay of Rio, but also by two images, two symbols. First, the cathedral, the architectural expression of a church seeking its role in the modern world. Then, the Maracatu Stadium, veritable pagan temple to the gods of soccer. Far from the stadiums, Copacabana, a place for family outings. The children play soccer, of course. But the garota, the pretty girls, seem more concerned about their tan than the athletic prowess of their Carioca husbands. To meet the true soccer aficionados, you have to go to the stadium. Here, we're watching the Flamingo, the team where the world-famous Ronaldo made his debut. Today, it's just two amateur teams playing, but so what? Up at the stands, there's just as much enthusiasm.
Soccer is our national flag. It's the most important thing in the world. We're born with the samba. When we hear it, we get up and... Samba is the only thing. It's such a sweet thing. It starts with a carioca. We are Samba.
While awaiting carnival and samba fever, the very elegant Ipanema promenade is alive with maracatu, cablocos, and capoeira, a veritable palette of dances and rhythms from the northeastern provinces. We know about the African ancestry of the Maracatu of Bahia, but what about the samba, born in Rio?
In Rio de Janeiro, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a fusion. The rhythm of the samba developed in the terreiros of Candomblé, in the terreiros of the Afro-Brazilian regions. After the ceremony, they would always party, and they still do. And this is where the samba was born, in the festivities following the religious ceremonies. The Carnival of Rio was born from a mixture. It's the result of European influence, but its structure, its ideology, and its rituals are African. Most of the young Cariocas, except for those with family ties to the Ubanda and the Candomblé, are very influenced by American rhythms. That's why certain samba schools go out of their way to recruit the teenagers, and can even be somewhat authoritarian in teaching them the importance of keeping in touch with their roots.
The first school opened in 1928. Then, year after year, a number of schools grew along with the carnival. The most important schools, which had 400 members in the 1950s, now count close to 4,000. Even the middle-sized schools like Tijuca are run like veritable industries.
We start work at the beginning of August with a skeleton crew of 50 to 100 people. Then, as the carnival gets nearer, the crew gets bigger. I would say that 1 month before carnival, there'll be 500 people working full-time. Given the Portuguese origins of Brazil, our school's theme this year will be the spread of the Portuguese language throughout the world. So the Tijuca School will pay homage to the Portuguese language. We'll show how the Portuguese navigators struck out from Portugal in their caravels to spread their language to the four corners of the planet. This float represents Africa, and the moment the Portuguese language arrived on the African continent. Here we show the relationship between the Portuguese discoverers and the black Africans. So this float is a homage to Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, Santa Tomau and Príncipe, and Guinea-Bissau. As soon as one carnival is over, in fact, we take a 15-day break and then we start planning for the next one. So a carnival is 12 months of work. We work 12 months a year.
At the end of the day, when the rays of the setting sun give a golden glow to the sky of Ipanema, Rio is one enormous party. The Feira de San Cristóvão is a big event for all the Nordestans. The people from Pernambuco and even Bahia get together in this popular, friendly atmosphere to dance the Phou all through the night. They take time out between two photos to enjoy a grilled steak or some manioc bread, a reminiscence of the time when the feira was only a huge food market. The photo, with its up-close and personal style, is no longer restricted to the migrants from the Northeast. More and more Cariocas come on weekends to party at the Northeastern market. As the pulsing rhythms of the photo fade into the distance, the members of the Tijuca Samba School are getting together somewhere on the other side of town. As Carnival approaches, they rehearse more and more frequently. Once a week, the Tijuca has open rehearsals to bring a bit of money into the school treasury. On the day of Carnival, each school will parade past the jury and be marked on different aspects of their production. The beauty of the floats and costumes, the quality of the choreography. Certain aspects are particularly important. The rhythm section, which can number up to 300 drummers and percussionists. the grace and agility of the star couple, made up of a master of ceremonies and a standard bearer. In the front part of the percussion section, the musicians vie with each other in virtuosity with tambourines, the reco-reco, and the cueca. While behind, the surdo keep the samba rhythm. Now, in the serenity of dawn, when the hectic beach of Copacabana seems to bathe in a calm of another age before the colonization, one has to admit that from the Maracatu of Recife and the Samba of Rio to the afauché that rhythms the candomblé rituals of Salvador, the blood of Africa has never ceased to pulse in the veins of Brazil.